Alright, so we have just finished walking through our front end and our three main functions. So just as a reminder, that would be creating a new multi-impact tracker, requesting consequential additions from other app teams that are impacted, sending multi-impact status updates to the global major incidents channel. So those are our three main functions, and we are going to walk in through the back and see a little bit of what's actually going on to make these things happen. All right, so we're going to begin by walking through the creation of the new multi-app impact tracker. Now this is by far the most in-depth of the three flows that we're going to be looking into. So there's a lot of different HTTP requests. Most of them are GET or POST requests. There's also a patch. So we're going to be getting a few different IDs, a lot of different metadata that we need to edit these different lists and make sure all the columns are added correctly. There's permissions that need to be both broken and then reassigned to be accurate so that our admins can edit things and so that users are not editing everything. So we're going to go ahead and dive in now. All right. So here we have our create new multi-app tracker Power Automate flow. So this starts by a button on the Power App side. When you hit this create button, one of the things that button does on select is run this flow. So within that, we get those 5 user inputs, incident ID, criticality, service restoration status, incident impact, and incident short description. So we initialize a variable for the title. That's just made up of the ID and criticality. We then remove parentheses. That's just to make it easier to use the title for different steps down the line. The parentheses end up causing quite a few issues and they're not really needed. So also we then have our first HTTP request to SharePoint. So this is to create the list. Big deal. So you have your site address and your URI. So that'll go ahead and give a target location for our request, right? So this URI is pretty simple. It's just saying we're going to a reporting and automation site and we're targeting the list area. So every time this flow is run, this body is used to create the new list, JSON. So it's just saying these are all SharePoint lists with the template of 100. The title will be the title that we just set earlier without the parentheses. The incident short description will show as the SharePoint list short description as well. And read security is set so users can read any item that's added to any of these lists, but they can only write to items that they wrote, that they created, or if they're an admin. All right. So right here, while we're initializing this variable, it's actually pulling from the list creation, taking the outputs from that, going to the D properties, the metadata within that, and pulling out the URI line. We will be using indexing and substrings to pull out the GUID that helps us target the specific list we just created. So that is in this scope here. So right now our main goals are to get the view and list metadata from this scope. So again, we start off by taking the index of that URI and finding where GUID is. So that's what we're getting the index of, which is more or less saying the position within that substring. So it goes ahead and grabs that and then sets, it sets the total length of how long the GUID would be, which is 36 here, right? So we basically take the substring beginning at GUID and pull the GUID out. So after that, we can use the GUID, which we've set as a variable, for a bunch of subsequent steps. So right here, we're grabbing the view metadata. This is the URI that would target that and pull out the metadata we need to use in subsequent steps. And the same thing for the item metadata. Pretty simple. The GUID wrapped around this will shoot out data we need. All right. So next, we have to actually add the columns to the list. Before you can do that, you do need to grab the view ID. We had half of it from the last step. So in this step, you do grab the rest of the view ID. Then you go ahead and pull that out and set that as a new variable. And yet again, you see the 36. The GUIDs always end with 36, so you know you could stop at that length. So then we pull into a couple different HTTP requests. So these are how you create the different columns. The JSON data below is pretty simple for most of the fields. You're looking for the field type kind 2. If you're just looking to enter in data, if you are doing a choice column, it goes to field type kind 6, right? So then you would enter in the different choices you want in this format down here, where you have your curly brackets surrounded by the different choices, right, after results. So a lot of them are true, regardless of if they're drop down and or just regular columns. But there are a few that you don't want to force to have every time, so it's just based on the incident column itself. So okay, not going to spend too much more time there. After that, we then look to add the columns to the view. So when you create the columns, they're kind of hidden in the back end of the view. Like they're there within the SharePoint settings, but they're not actually showing in the default view. So first thing we do is create that URI target to add all of the needed different columns to the view, right? So that's just taking the view ID we pulled as well as the GUID, throwing it into this format with the add view field at the end. Then we can use that variable in the URI setting for each of the different times we're adding apps to, or different columns to the view, right? Simple enough. All right, so those are pretty easy. Then we'll move on. So next, we needed to remove the title column from the view and form. The title column is set based on what else the user is choosing. So instead of making a user repeat that, we wanted to pull out the requirement for them to manually add title, because that's going to be pulled off of their incident ID and criticality. So to do that, we first had to get the view fields metadata. So looks pretty similar to adding a new item to view as far as you need the GUID and the view ID. It's a little bit of an ending difference for the URI. But this is going to go ahead and give us a lot of meta details that we need. And this will give us the meta details we need for the specific title metadata. So after that, you start to parse the JSON outputs. We only need specific properties. So eventually that gets you to here, where you're parsing out the D properties and just the ID portion of that property. So there's a bunch of different sub-properties that fall within each of these categories, and we were just looking for the ID. Okay, so this is that patch HTTP request. So what this is doing is telling it that we do not need title on the form. So more or less, we're just letting this know that, hey, this should be hidden from our form. It is not required. You don't need to. That was funny at first. I hid it, but it was still required. So you couldn't even create new items because there was a hidden required field. But now we got that all sorted out. Excellent. That works. And finally, last but not least, you're doing the opposite of adding things to the view, which is just removing them from the view. Very similar to adding. Awesome. Okay. So finally, we're looking into breaking the inheritance and role reassignments. So what's happening when you create a new SharePoint list, the first thing your SharePoint list does is it grabs all of the permissions from the website it is a child of, right? So what we want to do is break that to allow our SharePoint list to have unique permissions so that users only edit when we know they should be able to, right? So we go ahead and start out with a HTTP request to pull the reporting and automation visitors ID, right? So that puts it into this schema right here. There's a few different properties that we're sifting through, I guess you could say. But we only need the ID portion of the D properties sub-property. So yet again, you start seeing these little question marks, and then you see the D in the square brackets and the ID in the square brackets. You're just pushing through down to very specifically pulling out the ID. Okay, so then one more get request. So we need the role definition. So more or less, we need to pull out the role definition so that we can then reset it each time to create or to give the guests this create items custom permission that was set up. So by default, visitors over SharePoint cannot actually create items. So I created a different subset of permissions called create items, which needs to be given on this specific list to the guests that are using this. Not every app team user that needs to add a consequential incident is expected to be a member of our SharePoint. So we need guests to be able to create items. So we set the role ID here. Then we go into our HTTP requests. So this HTTP request, it first copies the role assignments over, but it also clears the subscope. So this basically lets us set our own custom permissions for our SharePoint lists that aren't inherited from parent sites. And finally, we see this is where it is adding that extra role ID to create items to the principal ID of our visitors for reporting and automation guests. And one thing we also did run into when I was looking at this in production with my last contract. So your M365 settings can be varied. One thing you want to make sure is that guests of whatever SharePoint site you are assigning the list to are able to add items. So we specifically wound up going with a communication public-facing SharePoint to host our lists while they were open. This allowed us to have users add their own items. And if we would have tried to put it onto a regular SharePoint site that was created from Teams, let's say, we would not have been able to have users add their own items. Guests were only available for all other users outside of your, or that have your org email address if you actually use that public-facing communication site. So just something to keep your eye out for. Definitely do not want to go through all of this and then find out you have no way to have your users add. Yeah, so keep it in mind. You do want to understand your organization's M365 settings. All right. So finally, we get to our final step. So this is where we're going to be composing a lot of the links and also adding our new tracker to the master multi-ink tracker. So starts off by just creating the new item link. So we have the title and we know that this is going to be the link each time. It's very similar for the link to the list as it is to the link to the new item. The only thing that actually changes is new form changes to all items. So now with just that, we have our ability to create new items and our ability to get users back to the list. Okay, so finally we go ahead and get to the end. Now this is where we are creating a new item on our master multi-ink tracker. And this kind of pulls everything together. So the way we have anything going on in our front end, all of this is attached to one master multi-ink tracker. So every time a new multi-ink tracker is created, a new line item is added to a master list. So we make sure to carry over the title, criticality, all of these different fields. Now, when you get to the list URL and the links and the GUID and the ViewID, these are all really important to pass, so that every time we're doing anything, we don't have to re-pull all of these different IDs. This makes it essentially possible to even send the status updates or send those user requests because we're tying it down to our master tracker. Yeah, so that is what's going on the Create New Multi-App Tracker. Let's go ahead and really briefly walk through our other two trackers next.